From being the darling archer of the fan base to being the figurehead of its future, here's how Norman Reedus can save the Walking Dead franchise. Reedus's character Daryl was everybody's favorite on The Walking Dead, and there are so many reasons why we loved him so much. Going off just the show, there's this air of mystery about him that's just so intriguing, and we don't really know anything about him besides the fact that he's Merle's brother. Understanding Daryl was one of the puzzles of the show, not just for the audience, but even for the characters. And it was a reason to stick around week after week that had nothing to do with zombies. He wasn't perfect or heroic, which contrasted him from Goody Two-Shoes Rick, the main character, but the guy had a heart of gold and always wanted to do the right thing, even when the going was tough. And speaking of tough times, those were the moments when Daryl really shined, because on top of being fascinating, he was also just a complete badass. This wasn't a guy to back down from a fight, even against his own brother, and throughout the show he survived impossibly dangerous situations, sometimes by himself. He was wicked with a crossbow, could turn anything into a weapon, and for heaven's sake, he blew up a tank. When all was said and done, he was left standing at the end of the show, even after so many others had fallen. Speaking of the other characters, Daryl was the most popular, but the show had a really great cast overall, which is the biggest reason people were tuning in. Honestly, tuning in is putting it very mildly. During the golden age of TV, The Walking Dead was doing insane numbers, and its early seasons beat all of their competition in ratings. Keep in mind, folks, that when The Walking Dead was running up the viewer count, it was sharing space with shows like Breaking Bad, Mad Men on the same network, not to mention other hits like Game of Thrones and Dexter elsewhere on TV. Now zombies were everywhere in 2010, so it wasn't the concept of the show that made it stand out, but people were totally attached to the characters. Despite the badassery of characters like Daryl, they were mostly people who were similar to us. We had friends and neighbors like these characters, and seeing them struggle with the zombie apocalypse was super relatable. Truth be told, I can't say that the writing and storyline of The Walking Dead stayed consistently good, but folks wanted to see how things would shake out for these characters. The series maintained its highest levels of viewership through Season 7, long past what the rest of the world thought was the show's sell-by date, and by that point, the writers had done a few things on the show that really riled up the fan base. In the end, the show's insane momentum was only stopped by Negan, who pretty much bashed it in the head with Lucille. I bet that when the writers were about to introduce Negan in the 6th season's finale, they must have been super excited. Negan was the most popular villain in Robert Kirkman's comic, and the writer had introduced him by having him brutally kill Glenn, but not before psychotically messing with the rest of the group. Season 6 ended with an adaptation of Negan toying with the group, with Jeffrey Dean Morgan being the perfect casting choice. At the end of the episode, Negan kills someone, and audiences wouldn't get to find out who it was until the next season, where it turned out that Abraham was the one who died. People thought Glenn was safe, but Negan went ahead and killed him too. These twists really angered the fans, because they liked Abraham, but they loved Glenn. As the show's production must have expected, ratings stayed high throughout Season 7, with people waiting to see Negan get his justice. But it didn't happen in that season. It turned out Negan was sticking around for a long time, and combined with a serious dip in the level of the writing, the show began turning away its fans. Season 8 averaged the lowest ratings of the show since Season 3, and it only got worse from there. See, the Negan and Glenn thing wasn't the last terrible idea these writers had, because they eventually went after the two main characters. Season 8's big headline moment was the death of Carl Grimes, who pretty much grew up on screen. Rick's son went through a lot in the zombie apocalypse, which turned him into a toughest-nails character, just like his dad. But his death was exactly the sort of thing that would happen on The Walking Dead, especially considering how much the show was relying on shock value at this point. The thing that made his death really controversial was stuff that happened off-set. See, the show mostly filmed in Atlanta, Georgia, and since this was what took up most of actor Chandler Riggs' time, he wanted to buy a house in Atlanta, but only if he was going to be on the show for another 8 years or however long. AMC reassured Chandler that he was here to stay, and buying the house was a great idea, so that's what Chandler did. Then the cameras started rolling on Season 8, and what do you know, Carl dies. It's not the death that ticked off the fans so much as the bait and switch AMC pulled on Chandler, as he now had a house in Atlanta that he didn't need anymore. And yet the bait and switch with Andrew Lincoln was even worse. Heck, it was the last straw for whatever was left of the fan base. Andrew Lincoln was one of the few actors left that had been on the show since day one, so by the time season 9 was on the horizon, it was easy to see why he might have been with the show. He made a big emotional announcement that he was leaving the show, leaving many fans wondering how the show would continue without its main character. It was no surprise, though, that Daryl was the one who became the main character. While the fans could have lived with this turn of events, it later emerged that not only was Andrew not leaving the franchise, he was going to star in a trilogy of Walking Dead movies. That didn't pan out, so he's going to be doing a Walking Dead show instead. So yeah, he and AMC lied to the fans, killing off the last bit of interest anyone had left. Season 10 attracted lower ratings than even Season 1, and the show's final season couldn't even average 2 million viewers. That was how one of the world's biggest TV shows wrapped up, and its future so far has been pretty bleak. While The Walking Dead is over, the franchise is still shambling forward. There have been a handful of spin-offs so far, with Fear the Walking Dead being the longest-running continuation of the franchise, ending with the 8th season in 2023. People hated that show, and they didn't like The Walking Dead, World Beyond Any better, with the second show literally lasting just 2 seasons. Tales of the Walking Dead managed to win some folks over, since the episodic stories are harder to mess up compared to a more serialized story. But neither of these franchises wound up being the return to glory that AMC wants from the franchise. People were just tired of The Walking Dead, and these shows didn't really have the spark that could bring them back. Now that Better Call Saul is over, the network really needs something to get people tuning in again. And you know, I'm not liking the odds that The Walking Dead Dead City could be the show to do that, nor is anyone going to be interested in the Rick and Michonne show after Andrew Lincoln's shenanigans. It really is up to Norman Reedus to pave the way for the future. When it comes to the main characters of The Walking Dead, Daryl was the only one who was alive by the end, and not completely ruined. The handful of people who were still watching the show were into him as the lead, and it helped that Angela Kang, the showrunner of the show's last stretch, did a lot to improve things. It's really telling that Daryl Dixon is the most anticipated spin-off, even though all we know about it is that it's going to feature Daryl and his best friend Carol, and Angela Kang's set to be the showrunner. If they stick to the essence of Daryl and Carol's characters, while coming up with a good reason for the show to exist in the first place, the show can attract a decent audience of former Walking Dead fans. Can the show achieve the ratings peak that the old show did? I seriously doubt that, but if AMC wants to restore the image of the franchise, this really is their best bet. So from leading it into its future, to being a magnet for fans, that's how Norman Reedus can save the Walking Dead franchise.